Breaking down the walls of segregation, 34 Richmond College students did the unthinkable almost 50 years ago when they sat down at white-only lunch counters, boldly testing Richmond's color lines. Tonight, CBS 6 anchor Reba Hollingsworth tells us how the Richmond 34 helped to change the course of history.
1960, tension from the civil rights movement simmering throughout the South. Young black college students and some whites challenging the laws of segregation.
I think there was just kind of a feeling that something was going to happen.
We've lived with slavery and segregation.
With Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. visiting black college campuses like Virginia Union, the movement picks up steam.
They didn't know that they wouldn't be set upon, that there wouldn't be violence. People had been killed in Virginia.
Students staging protests and sit-ins at segregated stores and restaurants. Greensboro, North Carolina, the first to test the segregated system. 20 days later, VUU students would do the same in downtown Richmond, considered the shopping hub of Central Virginia.
The thrust at the university then was that we can effectuate some change here. We don't need to accept the status quo. When the blacks went to these various stores, we could not try on clothing.
And they definitely couldn't eat there. February 20th, day one of a two-day movement. 100+ students walked into white-only restaurants at Woolworths, Grant's, and Tallheimer's and sat down.
Someone, a manager at the lunch counter, called my grandfather and said, "Black students have come to sit at the lunch counters. They're reading books. They're, not ordering. They're just sitting."
When the black students sat down, the restaurants shut down. February 22nd, the students tried again. The crowd of protesters even bigger. 19-year-old Leroy Bray was just a 19-year-old freshman when he went to Tallheimer's.
We walked in the door and we sat at the lunch counter on the first floor. Some went up to the Richmond room. You could see the workers becoming busy, and I suspect they called the higher-ups.
Elizabeth Tallheimer Smart is the granddaughter of the store owner, the late William Tallheimer Jr.
He said that by law, the police needed to come and ask them to leave. They had violated trespassing laws.
The police came in and asked us to leave, that we were trespassing on this property, and if we did not leave, we were going to be arrested.
Out of hundreds of student protesters, only 34 were arrested at Tallheimer's. Bray was one of the first. You can see officers leading him into a police car.
I had no idea how we even get out of jail.
Bray never found out who bailed him out. But what he did know, the Richmond 34 got what they wanted, a test case that would eventually go to the U.S. Supreme Court.
This is where Tallheimer's used to be before it was torn down in 2005 here at 6th and Broad. It was pretty much the entire block. Now part of it is this open lot. The other part of the store is now the new center stage. The Tallheimer family says the decision to call the police that day 50 years ago was all about saving the family business.
It would have collapsed. The business would have collapsed. And he said, "I would have integrated earlier, but I couldn't." It would not have been accepted by the majority of his clientele.
But the Tallheimers still took a hit. The sit-ins led to a year-long boycott and a $2.5 million loss when blacks and sympathetic whites stopped shopping. Then once the family tried to integrate more, the threats came.
The threats were apparently bad enough that they needed to have police guard inside and outside of the house.
William Tallheimer's efforts to integrate early didn't go unnoticed. President John F. Kennedy commended him and other Southern store owners at the White House. Leroy Bray says the Tallheimers were victims too and remembers the man he met at the courthouse when the Richmond 34 went on trial.
He said to us, if you ever need a job, said, come and see us. And I did that.
Bray ended up getting that job. Now he's a pastor at his own church in Chesterfield. 50 years later, the protesters, VUU, and the Tallheimers are remembering how 34 students nudged the conscience of a city and a nation.
What did we learn, and how can we apply it? Because you can be an agent for change, I can be an agent for change, and look what they did.
That's our Reba Hollingsworth reporting. 3 years after the Thalheimer sit-in, the U.S. Supreme Court tossed the case back to the state courts. By then, most stores had desegregated, including Thalheimer's. Virginia Union University is honoring the Richmond 34 starting next week. You'll find an entire list of events at VUU and in the city on our website at WTVR.com.